Hey everybody, it's Wendy. In case you didn't know, David finally got off his butt and finished his book, True Crime and Consequences. The book is super educational and talks about the world of true crime and where it meets real investigations. It is perfect for everyone, from true crime fans like myself, to the true crime podcaster or YouTuber, to the amateur detective or web sleuth. And not to leave anyone out, you cops need to read this book too. True Crime and Consequences is available at murderpolicepodcast.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, well, pretty much anywhere you'd find a great book like this. So true crime fans, go get your copy today.
So I guess here's the question is, and the audience really needs to kick in on this. Should she get parole? I mean, and again, this is not to be argumentative, but it's a great philosophical question: is should Susan Smith at some point get paroled, and why?
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Three Things. Susan Smith, a Murder Police podcast production.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. We're back again with Three Things. I'm Wendy. David, how are you?
Doing good. Yeah, I'm excited. This is one of those cases that speaks to you a great deal, so I'm excited to do it with you.
It does. You know, ever since you came up with the idea of doing Three Things, I told you from the beginning this was on my list.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we're finally back again.
And I like doing these too. I like mixing them in with the cases and things like that. So for the fans, don't get all worried and freaked out and everything, that we're going to mix these in and come and go with them a little bit.
I think it's just something fun to do to kind of not break up the monotony of our typical interviewing detectives, or our missings or whatever we may have. But the Three Things are just kind of fun, mostly just to recap cases. This is on Susan Smith, a case from back in 1994. But also, some people may not have heard of these. It's kind of something interesting to look into. That's true.
Yeah, the more we stretch back, the less likely people are familiar. And then if they are familiar, maybe a reminder. So again, we're going to do 3 things each on the Susan Smith case.
On Susan Smith. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Susan Smith case from 1994?
Absolutely, good idea. It's been a minute since this case happened. So for people that have never heard of it, let's do a general background on it, and for people that have heard of it, kind of a refresher. Let's start with some background information. Susan Vaughn Smith was born on September 26, 1971, in Union, South Carolina. Records indicate that her childhood was rather turbulent. At some point, her parents had divorced, and when Susan was just 6 years old, her father died by suicide. In 1991, she married David Smith. They had 2 boys, Michael, born in 1991, and Alexander, born in 1993. But their marriage was rocky, marked by separations, reconciliations, and ongoing conflict. On October the 4th, 1994, during the evening, Susan called police with a shocking story. She said she had been stopped at a red light when an African-American man approached her car, ordered her out, and drove away in her car, with her 2 children still strapped inside. That claim launched a massive manhunt. Law enforcement, volunteers, and national media descended on Union, South Carolina. Television shows showed Susan pleading for the safe return of Michael and Alexander, and her tearful appeals captured the nation's attention. But as the investigators dug deeper, problems emerged. No one saw the supposed carjacker. Roadblocks turned up nothing. And some of Susan's statements didn't match earlier versions of her story. Detectives also learned that Susan had been romantically involved with another man, one who made it clear he did not want children. That revelation shifted the focus of the investigation. 9 days after the boys were reported missing on November 3rd, 1994, Susan Smith actually confessed. She admitted there had been no carjacker. Instead, she had driven her car to a boat ramp at John D. Long Lake with Michael and Alexander inside. She released the parking brake, letting the car roll into the water. Both boys drowned, still strapped into their car seats. Divers later pulled the vehicle from the lake with the bodies of these two young children inside. Prosecutors argued that Susan killed her sons because she saw them as an obstacle to her relationship with her lover. On the other side, the defense pointed to her history of depression and a suicide attempt shortly before the murders. Susan's trial began in July of 1995. The state sought the death penalty, describing her actions as deliberate and self-serving. The defense maintained that Susan was emotionally disturbed and not thinking rationally. On July 22, 1995, the jury found her guilty of 2 counts of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after 30 years. As of today, Susan Smith is serving her sentence at the Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood, South Carolina.
So that catches us up with Susan Smith from 1994.
Right.
So with that said, well, let's dive into our 3 things.
Absolutely. And as always, you go first. What's your number one thing?
Thank you. This case has just baffled me since it occurred. And, back in 94, we're talking 31 years ago, there wasn't all of the true crime on TV. But, even back then, I was still baffled by this case. And, I was young at that time, but I remember just being blown away I was blown away by the case. So let me just dive into my 3 things. And I've got my list of notes here because I've been working hard on this. But these 3 things, and they were so easy for me to choose because they were always, I've got more than 3, but they were always 3 things that stood out to me. And the first is, Susan's claim that she was carjacked by a black male who took the car with her 2 children, Alex and Michael, inside, and they were ages 1 and 3, 14 months and a 3-year-old. So that claim of she's at an intersection and a black male just mysteriously appears from in the night and takes her car. Now, I'm not saying carjackings don't happen because they do, but when I heard that, it just something didn't sit right.
So even back then, when the news broke, it kind of spoke to you. And
it did. Yeah. I thought, because you didn't really hear of carjackings back in 94. My first thought, because at that time, I'm not going to tell my age, but my first thought was, oh gosh, could that happen to me at an intersection?
Sure.
You just didn't hear about it a lot, at least not where I grew up.
Yeah. Because a good point of clarification there is you didn't hear about it a lot because we didn't have the information highway that we have now.
No, we didn't.
But carjackings have been going around since
they've been going
cars.
around, but I grew up in a little town, Paris, Kentucky, and
probably didn't have a lot in Paris.
Didn't happen there. It just didn't. So that was my number one thing of my 3 things was this male just mysteriously appears, takes her car with her 2 children in the back. And like I said, yes, that can happen, but...
Yeah, it was my experience that when that happened, a lot of times the carjacker wasn't aware kids were in the car.
Right.
And, for example, one of the most common ways is if it wasn't a straight out carjacking, would be somebody pulls up to the gas station, leaves a kid or 2 in the car.
Yes.
Runs in to pay
leaves the
for
car
gas.
Running.
Exactly. And a car thief jumps in. But it could still happen, and it has happened, where the carjacking occurs. Those happen fast. They're quick. There's a lot of anxiety and frustration and yelling and screaming and people thinking they're going to die. Really, that's what a carjacking is.
Right.
So there's always a possibility that somebody could jump in and then...
Sure, and it does happen.
Sure. Yeah.
But I just recall back then thinking, who's just going to take the car with two? And obviously when they carjack, they don't know there's children in the back. And most of the time you hope that they at least let the children out. But that was my first thing of, it just didn't set well with me.
I think so too. I thought the same thing, is that there's that old thing of what do we used to say, possible but not probable.
Right.
And sometimes you have to look at these things and look at them, even naively we can look at them and say, what's the real likelihood? So I'm with you. I think back then too, I agree with you that first story was there. And let's just, the elephant in the room too is the fact that she informally indicted a mysterious person of color. That's one of those things that's, when we talk about biases and racism and stuff like that, that's one of those underlying threads in our culture that's going to be the scary person.
Yes.
And I know that because I had cases where people would identify a mysterious actor in a bad case that never existed, and ironically enough, most often it was somebody of color. So that's worth pointing out. That's worth talking about a little bit. Is that's an unfortunate thing? Is that
that she just pointed a finger.
That's it. Exactly. Exactly. And maybe in her world, we don't know her. In her world, that synthesis made a lot of sense. But it's not uncommon either. It's not uncommon. So, yeah, I think that's one that the people who were old enough to remember when this case happened is, I'll bet they agree too, that they're watching the news, and that's one of those things that makes you go, So the whole storyline. So, what was your number 2?
Well, as you know, 9 days later she came out and told the truth. Okay,
right.
So this drags on for all these days with her, which leads into my number 3. They kind of piggyback each other.
Sure.
Number 3 is she's pleading and crying in front of the cameras during these 9 days leading up to the 9 days, okay? So to not jump, but to intertwine those. Now, as a mom and you as a dad, of course we're going to be pleading for our children's safe return, right? The dad, David Smith was his name, her husband, he was genuine, but there was something about her, even back then, I was like, that seems so fake. I wasn't a mother at that time, but especially looking back now, she just didn't, it seemed very disingenuous. The tears seemed fake. She was kind of looking away, and the way she was pleading just seemed forced and fake to me. So when it comes out 9 days later that she had done this, that intertwines with my 2-3, which I guess are together, it was a suicide attempt.
Right.
Okay. So that also never set well with me because, and thank God I've never been in a position where I've contemplated that. But if you are looking to commit suicide, why are you going to murder your 2 children along with you? That suicide is for you, not to murder your 2 children. And subsequently, she jumped out of the car at the last moment. Her body couldn't let her do it. I think something I read at one point said that. So at that point, then it's not a suicide attempt. You're just murdering your 2 children. So was it a suicide attempt? In my opinion, no, it wasn't. And again, let me preface, this is only my opinion.
Sure.
Okay. We're all welcome to our own opinions. And if you don't agree with it, I'm sorry, but that's mine. I just thought, if that is a suicide attempt, why are you going to involve your 2 young children with that? And why in that kind of horrific manner?
True. Murder-suicide, though. Not uncommon.
Not uncommon, but why 2 innocent children? We see that in domestics.
That's murder-suicide.
Yes.
Is that you take something from somebody. And so I see what you're saying. Now, we rationalize it as parents as that we couldn't do that. But I might have mentioned before, but when you're in policing, one of the things that you do is you find people who are deceased. People don't get the mail, they don't show up, they don't go to work. And usually a family member, landlord, somebody calls and the police come up and you enter into a home or an apartment under exigent circumstances because there's a problem that people believe is there. And we do that. And that's part of the job. And then you go in through a window or a door or something, and unfortunately, sometimes you find people that are deceased. And the first experience I had on patrol with that was a murder-suicide, where a father shot his baby. I use the word baby. I believe the child was about 18 months old, and then shot himself. And in that case, so there's the completion of that act. And the father was estranged. There was a divorce proceeding. And, of course, the running theory, and probably was accurate, is that nobody was going to have that child if that was going to be interrupted. So while I think that she probably used that as a defense, probably for sure, and whatnot, so you have those who are known, and they're unfortunately very frequent. But the other thing, too, with suicide, too, is when people don't go through or they change their minds. So I get what you're saying, but it is possible. Now, I think that she probably articulated a defense with it, because when you've done something like this, the defense team's going to have to throw everything against the wall they can.
Oh, sure.
But people do change their minds. I've read articles
They
about,
do, but then why did she not attempt to get her children back out of that car, or at least run and try to get help to get them out?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, those are the things that...
And I do understand people do change minds. However, I think the difference in the case that you had with the 17-month-old being shot because it was a custody dispute, the difference here is she was having an affair with a wealthy man named Tom Finley. And prior to these murders, he had sent her a letter telling her that he wanted to end the relationship. He didn't want children. And then these children end up, being murdered. So in your case, the man had a custody dispute. This isn't that she was fighting a custody battle with her husband, David. She simply wanted to be with this man who didn't want kids. So the kids were in the way, which led me to my next point of, then if the kids were in your way, why didn't you just say, you take the children, I'm going over here with Mr. Finley, who doesn't want kids, but you're going to murder them and deprive them of life because you're selfish and you want to be with a man who doesn't want kids.
Right. Because I think that's something that came up in that case often.
It did. And he made it abundantly clear he didn't want kids. That was a problem for him. And then mysteriously the kids get abducted in this carjacking and driven into this lake.
Right. Exactly.
So, yeah, that was a real, for everybody who followed this case, it was horrendous. Even still today, there's a memorial at the John D. Long Lake for these two little boys. And, you've watched documentaries when her upcoming parole in 2024, there was a documentary with her husband who obviously did not want her out.
Oh, of course.
And, this man struggled, and I'm sure still, obviously today, still does, but he would have gladly taken his children if she wanted to go gallivant with her new love affair.
Sure. Yeah.
As opposed to killing them.
I think that's what reasonable people would do. But of course, now we're way outside reason.
Right.
That's what it is with all these cases. There's no reasonableness in any of this. That's why they're evil, right? It is because there's no reasonableness. So let's recap before we go further. What was your number one again?
Well, the claim of the black man carjacking and driving the car.
The lie.
The lie.
Yeah,
the initial lie.
Yeah, because and that's a good one too, because it's a lie that was powerful because you had a lot of people turn their attention to it when the media got hold of it, and a lot of people really in that camp of can we find these children? The panic that causes and the fear that causes. That is excellent. What was your number two?
Well, my 2-3 combined was her looking and pleading at the camera, please return my children safely. I miss you, Michael. Alex, I love you. Please return my boys. And then the suicide claim that came in there to say that, yes, I did this, but it was an attempt to commit suicide.
Gotcha.
So those were my 3 things that stood out with that case.
Cool beans. So what it would be neat is if the people that are watching, if they can go down to the comment section and talk about those three things again, like what is their opinion on those three things.
Yeah.
And as always, if we've got some gaps, because we just summarized these pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's so many more details in this case that I didn't
deal.
cover. Those are just three things that stood out to me. And again, I want to say, because sometimes these are points of contention, these are only my opinion. This is just what spoke to me since 1994 in this case, that even back then, like I said, before I had a child, had me scratching my head of how does a mom do that? And now obviously that I have a child, who does that?
Exactly.
What kind of monster does that to their child? And I have to say, after watching that recap with her husband, David, who since has remarried and had 2 children, that was such a powerful thing to watch. But I wonder, when she got denied that parole, it was reported, and I don't know who reported it. I only had read about it and heard about it. She had a fit in her cell because she got denied her parole. And I thought to myself,
Kentucky Case Files explores infamous and overlooked true crime in the Bluegrass State, covering tantalizing cases that made headlines large and small throughout Kentucky history. KCF delves deep into the serious, macabre, and always fascinating stories that showcase why Kentucky was once called the Dark and Bloody Ground. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
even now, in 2025, all these years later, 31 years later, how can you live with yourself? You've had plenty of time to commit suicide, and I'm not advocating people commit suicide, but if that's what she was wanting to do, but how does she sit there and toy with, I don't even deserve parole. I killed my 2
Clearly
little
she
boys.
doesn't. No.
And when I heard that she had a fit because she got denied, well, clearly she doesn't.
Well, most people who kill other people don't. And
No.
that's we could do a whole show and maybe bring some other detectives back in and maybe even some attorneys. But what people forget is that if you have the capacity to do this, you're wired differently than most everybody else in society.
Yes.
The people that take another life are the outlier. I know we have statistics and it looks like it's common, but they don't have that capacity. If they could feel remorse, if they could feel true regret, they would never take the life in the first place. But that's that whole thing of that discussion of what is evil, which I believe exists, and it comes down to always comes down to narcissism and being the center of the universe, and that's it. Her wants, her desires continue to come in front of the lives of those 2 children, her husband, and the community. That's evil.
Yes.
And that's why she has a tantrum.
Yes.
That is a devil that can't get out. And because that's narcissism, me. So
Yes.
those are good. Those are real good.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump into mine because they play off of yours a little bit too.
So you're number 1.
Yeah, the number one thing was the way those kids died.
Oh.
And you'll hear everybody that is in the business say that it's a tough business emotionally to begin with, but that's exacerbated. And the toughest thing is when you deal with the death of a child. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you that it's not just a murder. It's going to someone's home when a death has occurred for whatever reason. And again, I think it's because if we're parents or we're thinking about being parents, we can empathize and try to put ourselves in those shoes, and it's difficult. It's always horrible. I got blessed with not doing too terribly many, although I aided in a bunch of them. Where I worked is that the Crimes Against Children's unit would actually pony up and run up front, and then the homicide unit would come in as a support unit to that. But in this case, it was brutal.
Yeah, and it not only it's horrible enough that she chose to do that to her 2 babies, but I think oftentimes people don't think about the first responders or the divers in this case who had to go pull those little boys out of that car.
Yeah.
That's something I'm sure still 31 years later they can't shake.
Oh, no, that's in their PTSD box. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
that's in the PTSD
and
box.
Just to think what those 2 little boys went through, that's suffering.
Well, yeah. I guess that's the part that's hard about that, because you had mentioned who does that. Why would she go in and attempt a rescue? And then, of course, the whole thing about going into days of lying until they got a confession out of her. But, because you have to wonder, one, it's pretty clear from the evidence that I've seen, or not evidence, the material I've seen, is that they were strapped into car seats. So there's no mobility there. Then you wonder if they were awake. I think in testimony maybe I read, and somebody in the audience can straighten this out, that they felt pretty sure at least one was awake.
Even if they were asleep, I'm sure when the water started coming in, they woke up pretty quick.
That's the point, is that,
so they both were awake.
Yeah, unless she, drugged them or something like that. But either way, yeah, you're going to wake up. And then once the children are aware, that you're just trying to think of the fear, the panic, and the first thing that they're going to think about is, where is my mom?
Right.
And of course, they don't have any capacity at that point to put together that mom just did this. But that adds so much pain to this, is that the first thing a child thinks about, because that's their sense of security, where security should be, is, where is my mom?
Yes.
Or my dad, however the case, wherever this is at. And then that panic. And I guess one thing I thought about is that one of my favorite movies and books of all time is a movie called The Perfect Storm. And the book was written by a guy named Sebastian Junger. And I remember reading the book, is that he talked a lot from interviewing people, what that's like to drown. And he interviewed people that had been so close to that veiled line of death when they were drowning, and rescued or something to the end, that he went into a lot of detail. And then I found later that in a book he had called In My Time of Dying, is that Sebastian Junger actually had a near-death experience in a drowning incident. And when you talk to people or listen to people, he breaks it down like this. He talks about how when it first happens, you have that initial, what he calls the initial shock and disorientation. He said it was almost like a black pit opening up and pulling him in, and like a sense of disbelief. And of course, a child has no sensory experience at all on this, that it was just consume them. But for adults or people that have more awareness, is that this trying to accept the fact that this is actually happening right now,
yes,
that this is going on. For a child, that'd be a little bit different, but again, that just exacerbates that terror that had to been there. The fact that when that shuts off and you can't, is that conscious struggling for air, trying to get air in, and it's not going to happen. And
I'm sure they were crying and gulping more water as they were crying.
Right, exactly. Yeah, gulping water technically happens later, because you're shutting down. Your body is doing everything it can, because the body knows it can't take any water in through that trachea into the lungs, but it does that. But he talks about how it really messes with the vocal cords, and how you change your blood oxygen levels and things like that. And then the body starts to shut down, which is once the body goes without oxygen, is that it does start to cataclysmically shut down. And while we're still conscious too, is that's going on. You weaken, that's when we get lightheaded and all those kind of things. And then he talked to other people when he did the book about how there's a point where you just black out. And then if we get water in our lungs, that's likely to be the time when that's going to happen. So to think about those experiences, especially with a child, and again, they're not going to be fundamentally aware of what all that means, but holy cow, how terrible. My number 2 plays off of your quasi 2-3 thing, is when she reports that story, that sends off all the alarm bells, and all of the king's horsemen and all the king's men are on board for an investigation. Multi-jurisdictional, everywhere, including, and I'd have to look, but I have got to assume the FBI rode in at some point.
Well, and even a lot of people in the community were outreaching.
That's it, is people searching, people caring. And the part of that that's frustrating, because I've experienced it as well, is that vast amount of resources that's simply wasted.
Mm-hmm.
And some people might write that off and say, well, it's a cost of business, and I get that and everything, but there's another thing called opportunity cost. And what that is that the time spent chasing the BS that she laid out. And I will say this, I can guarantee you that part of that investigation included some segment of that investigation was probably working to disprove her story because there was suspicions from the early on. But until then, for the public and for the seeking of justice going on. But here's what I'm getting at. All of that monumental time spent on that BS, other cases, other situations were being put on another burner.
Yes.
And we've talked about it before. It's the reality of the business. It's not everything goes in the pot at the same time. You can't cook with more than two hands. And that it pales to the death of the children, but it's also disgusting again that narcissism and that selfishness of the idea of consuming all that energy that could have been used somewhere else is crazy. That just, as somebody who's been through it, I can remember personally criminally charging people for lying to us and initiating an investigation. And when we found out later, that was my practice, is that you took a criminal charge. And in some cases, police departments can actually, and governments can sue you. They can calculate all the hours that were spent on it, and they can sue you. So my number two was that just disgusting use of resources. And now number three is something that I think that we can ask the audience to really chip in on a little bit, and you touched on it as well, is that she was up for parole in 2024, got denied, had a temper tantrum. I'm not surprised. Unfortunately, she will be up for parole every 2 years, which means the family and everybody has to saddle up. Dave Smith has to saddle up. Everybody has to saddle up, go in front of the board, beg. And we've covered cases where that's happened. For example, in the murder of Michael Turpin, is when you learn the anguish that has on a family to repeat and relive that, and then you go into court and you think that you've got justice and you get a sentence, and then these family members often spend the rest of their lives trying to ensure that justice holds on. And the sad reality is that if people don't go to those hearings, then those people get a greater likelihood of getting out. So David Smith is going to deal with that every 2 years.
Yes.
Unless maybe, I have no idea what it's like in South Carolina, but like, for example, in the Michael Turpin case, at some point just a few years ago, that the two suspects in Michael's death were ordered to serve out, which means they took that off the table and they can't apply anymore. And what a relief.
Yes.
Because, Michael's parents are considerably older than when he was murdered and living that nightmare. So I guess here's the question is, and the audience really needs to kick in on this. Should she get parole? I mean, and again, this is not to be argumentative, but it's a great philosophical question: should Susan Smith at some point get paroled, and why? And I won't take anybody on. We won't debate them on it and everything, but I'm interested to see, because people have a lot of unique ideas.
Yeah, I'd like to know their ideas. And again, it's only an opinion, and we all have our own.
Sure.
Can I give my opinion?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I don't think she should.
Yeah.
Because again, David, the husband, has to relive that. But even if David wasn't on the table to have to relive it, you chose to strap your children in a car.
Right.
And you chose to lie and say that a black man carjacked you and drove your car, took off with the car, drove your car away with your two children. And then you're going to come clean that you did it. But we should, 30 years, some later, however long with that time when she gets it, just pretend like it didn't happen and you can come walk the streets. Your babies aren't walking the streets. They're dead.
Yeah. It questions what our sense of justice is. Because I'm going to believe, I'm with you. I don't think she should ever walk out of a facility. Parole in some exceptional circumstances might be applicable. In
Sure,
the death of
depending on
person.
the circumstances.
That's it. But
yes.
One case at a time. But then again, people have a lot of philosophical reasons. Maybe they have religious reasons. Maybe they have different belief systems or anything. So I'm going to ask, and on the audience is, what do you think? And again, if you've watched and listened to me and Wendy, we are not going to take you on. This is not a
it's not a debate. It's not to argue.
It's about starting a conversation.
It's just and appreciating also that we just want to see what people's opinions are.
That's it.
And we respect their opinion like we want ours respected.
Absolutely.
And some people may say, oh my gosh, I can't believe Wendy said she should never see the light of day. Well, that's my opinion.
That's it. Yeah. And I think in this world, we need to get back to the point where we can express opinions and have dialogues without going at each other.
Oh, yeah. You don't got to be mad at somebody because you don't like what they think.
That's it. So the Murder Police podcast, we're not about that. So, So again, I guess people, should she eventually get parole? Let's ask a few things maybe people can answer. Should she get parole? Mm-hmm. How much time? She's already served a significant amount of time. How much time should she or somebody like her actually spend? If you were a juror and you found her guilty and you gave her that sentence, what would you expect? That came up on the radio talk show I just did, where when jurors go through all of that trouble, because being on a criminal jury in a big case like this is emotionally draining and it's very difficult for people. But if a jury decides and says life or 60 years, should that person do that? Or should the jury get like a side note that says, okay, if you give them 60, they could get out in 12 or what? So maybe the audience can talk about that. Put yourselves, if you're a juror and you gave that sentence, how would that impact you if that person got out earlier or substantially earlier?
And I would even like to piggyback to that and add, if you were the other parent,
amen,
would you be okay with that parent who murdered your children, your babies?
Right.
Would you be okay with them being out walking around?
Yeah, and there we go. And should the surviving victim's family members have a harder say on that than anybody else?
I feel like they should.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think that's
because
the first place
unless you've had your feet in those shoes and you've stuck those babies in a casket and watched them go under the ground, are you okay with her getting out? Maybe you're going to see her at the Walmart or the Kroger or wherever you grocery shop.
Right.
Because I'm going to tell you, I wouldn't be okay with seeing the person who murdered my child out walking around, because I'd be landing myself back in prison real soon.
Probably so.
That's how I feel. That's David Smith's children. I'm not even going to call them Susan's children, because a mother shouldn't do that to her babies.
Right. So back to it again. If the audience would just jump in and
jump in, share your opinions,
have a good philosophical conversation about it. Maybe, and broaden the context too, is when should parole apply and when shouldn't it? What are your non-negotiables? What is the audience's non-negotiables? And that ought to be a pretty good discussion. So we can start with Susan and work our way out as to how this works.
Yeah, and I think also if it were a different circumstance and it was a car wreck and she couldn't help it, that's different. It was an accident. This was a deliberate act.
It was.
So
it was.
Do you feel like she should be out since it was a deliberate act versus it was a car wreck? She couldn't get them out in time and they subsequently died.
Right.
And she was heartbroken and she ran to the whatever the circumstance
all of that
may be.
In that scenario, we would not be talking about this case.
That's right.
Period. End of story.
This was a case of murder.
That's it.
Tried and true murder. I also would like to know, I don't think we've ever asked our audience, and again, a lot of people may not have known of this Susan Smith case because it was from so long ago. But I would like to know, those of you who had, or if you look into it online, what are your 3 things?
Yeah, for sure.
What 3 things stands out? Exactly. Becca, my big German Shepherd once dead, her 2 cents worth.
You'll see her popping in and out a little bit. So,
Becca, what's your 3 things? Milk bones, cookies,
and milk bones,
and more milk bones.
Like, see, now she's looking because she thinks I have some. So, well, good deal. Well, I think your 3 were good.
Yeah,
I think
that it's
too. A good. I'm excited for everybody watching or listening. If you listen, pop over to YouTube. You should have subscribed to us by now on the Murder Police podcast channel and let us know what you think. Until the next time, take care. The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police Podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police Podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.